Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very exciting episode here of Prinsights. I am so fortunate to have been able to find a time slot that works to talk to one of my favorite visual analyst. I mean, you're so much more than that, James Eagle, and all of the work that he's done, which I have been noting about to you and all throughout Substack. So thank you, James, for joining me here in the evening, your time. I want to get into all of the work that you do, but first, would you give us a little bit of a background to kind of who you are and how you really honed in on this area of data visualization and analysis combined?
Sure. I mean, it was a complete accident, to be honest with you. So I come originally from the asset management industry. I worked there for a good 20 years. Came from an economics background. I worked in a variety of roles with big financial institutions. But what happened was that about 7 years ago, I was in a situation where my job was to write about markets and to write to people and to explain what's going on. And that's what I did. I had moved from London to Switzerland with my family, and I was working for a reasonably sized bank over here in Zurich, Switzerland. And I had a problem where I didn't know whether or not anyone was reading what I was writing. And so, I mean, I was getting great feedback from management, from the portfolio managers, but I never got feedback from the actual investors who were the clients of the company. And so I did something. I wrote an article on LinkedIn. This is 7 years ago, bear in mind. So articles were quite common back then. And to cut a long story short, basically what happened was it was a bit of a disaster. Turns out I was a terrible writer. Now, I wasn't writing terrible. It was grammatically correct. I wasn't making spelling mistakes. I mean, there was nothing wrong with the text per se, but it was just really, really boring. It turns out that if you write about the Fed cutting interest rates, people don't find that interesting. And so that really bothered me because it meant that nobody was really reading my stuff. So I was earning this big Swiss salary, and nobody actually cared that I was adding no value to that company. And that bothered me. So, of course, nowadays we write articles on Substack, not LinkedIn, because it's a much better model. But I continued with the writing kind of journey, and I started kind of doing a lot of research. How do I make people listen? How do I make things more simpler? What do I do? I discovered Simon Sinek. What about this stuff about start with why? And I kind of developed my own formula. And I left that bank, and then I went out into the world, and it wasn't a linear thing. I tried lots of different things. I worked 50% as a head of investor relations for a battery company, which kind of supplemented my exploration project, to find out what worked for me. And I still write a lot on Substack. But what I found was that what was missing is this ability to communicate really quickly with people. So when you go on social media, one of the biggest problems that we have is that people are scrolling really fast with their feeds, and they're thinking fast, not thinking slowly. And they think emotionally. They behave in a very similar way to how financial markets behave in the short run. It's emotional, it's volatile. People panic suddenly, and markets crash. And social media content is very similar. People are not thinking in a very logical, slow way. They're thinking in a very fast, emotional way. And so what happens is they have very little bandwidth to concentrate on what you are saying. So long format kind of text doesn't work so well on a lot of social media platforms like LinkedIn or Twitter, obviously Twitter. And so you need a different format. And so what I did was I tried to create a format that worked, that would compress lots of information in a minute and tell a story that was very powerful. And today we're living in this world where we are saturated with data. There's so much data out there. And you would think that that would create more clarity, but it doesn't. It creates more confusion. It actually makes the world more dangerous, actually. We talk a lot about carbon emissions, but we never talk about data pollution. And that data pollution clouds our judgment and makes it more difficult to understand how the world works. And so what I did was I took a format and I made it entertaining. I started creating these animated charts using JavaScript I added music and I made it like a big kind of cinematic production, made people excited, told a powerful story that people could relate to in their ordinary lives. And it just took off. And that's pretty much how I got into data visualization. I'm not a career data scientist. I'm obviously surrounded by data because I come from an industry that is full of data. But I used some the storytelling techniques that I learned from writing to apply those to data visualization, and that's what I'm doing now.
Well, I appreciate everything you do. And I just want to sidebar here that one of the amazing things that you have done, and people should know here viewing this, that James's work goes out to millions of people, has millions of views on a regular monthly basis, I believe. And also, um, you are unique, James, in how you marry all of that together, how you've come to using data as a story telling effectively narrative to what's going on in the markets and to cutting through that noise. Plus, you have that banking background. So you're able to find the story, narrate the story visually, and I actually do like the writing that accompanies some of your data visualizations as well. So I think you do that so well. Absolutely cutting edge. I want to, speaking of cutting edge, you just put out today a piece with data visualization as well as prose analysis on the deep seek phenomenon that just struck the markets. And you went broad, which I loved about what you did. You didn't just talk about the market and what NVIDIA did and all of that. You actually expanded that into geopolitics. What's the US and China going to do and so forth. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that research that you put together so quickly and so just emotionally connective.
I mean, I think, you know, coming from my background, I tend to think I'm constantly thinking about risk. So I think the one thing that investors hate is uncertainty. And right now, what you've seen a narrative that was quite simple, that said that AI is going to change the world, it's going to change our lives, and it's all happening in America, and it's all going to be backed and supported by large tech companies that have huge resources, have access to powerful, huge data centers and infrastructure that other countries like China just don't have access to. And what the emergence of this new AI tool, DeepThink, has shown is that actually it may not actually be such a simple narrative. And as we all know, that narratives are not always that simple. I mean, I thought it was, I think there is a geopolitical angle here, and it needs to be addressed. And I don't think it really has been, to be honest with you. Like there is a reason why markets reacted. NVIDIA's market capitalization plunged by a colossal $580 billion, which is the largest single day loss in tech history for a single firm. In fact, I think it's the largest stock market loss in a day for a single company. And it's a phenomenal amount of money. And the irony, of course, is that US export controls that are designed to hold back Chinese AI development may have actually spurred the very breakthroughs that they intended to avert in China. The DeepSeek's open source model emerged under really heavy constraints. There's a huge trade war going on between the US and China. And what DeepSeek has done is it's produced something that has challenged the established order. And I think, in a way, it brings to mind, and I wrote this in the piece, that old kind of, it's almost like an urban legend. But there was this joke that used to be told that while NASA spent millions on a zero gravity pen, the Soviet cosmonauts simply used pencils. And I find it quite. I mean, it's we joke about it, but it's all about, if you go if you look at the Silicon Valley culture and the way that companies raise money, billions and billions and billions have been spent and invested on AI startups. And then you've got this seemingly kind of very, um, uh, I mean, I don't believe it for a second, but you've got this claim that this company DeepSeek has developed and taken on some of the big, mighty, colossal AI AI superpowers in the US for just $6 million of investment. I mean, it's a laughable amount, and I think it's really more designed to probably almost make a mockery of the US technology industry. And I think there's a bit of political point scoring here. So I don't really take that too seriously. But what is impressive is what the DeepSeek model can actually deliver. It's not quite at the same level as OpenAI. So OpenAI's most advanced models still beat DeepSeek quite considerably, and this hasn't really been spoken about, and I don't know why. But it's. I mean, I've used DeepSeek, and it's nowhere near on the same level as OpenAI, but it's remarkable how close it's got in such a short time, with presumably much less hardware and infrastructure spent.
Yeah, and again, your piece was fascinating. Everyone watching here should really subscribe to Eagli's Substack. I mean, it is phenomenal. I'm a paid subscriber, and it is really one of my favorite places to look for information about all sorts of trends developing quickly and concisely and visually every single morning. So James, you talk about AI and sort of also how that is a a growing geopolitical hot potato or battleground. And the synergistic battleground to that or other contingent area is energy. And you have done a lot of work and provided a lot of information visually and analytically on what's been happening in energy and battery technology and in the underlying commodities that drive them. And I wonder if you, within all that work, have some favorite charts or pieces to direct viewers to where that is, still very much an evolving trend.
I think it is very much an evolving trend. I mean, working for a battery company, one of the things that I often looked at was the supply chain risk. Coming from a financial background, you're always thinking about risk. And what no one talks about with the EV revolution is the supply chain risk. How do you get those battery materials and acquire them if, 70% of all cobalt, which is a key ingredient for an EV battery, comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where they've got child labor issues and serious problems. And likewise, even extracting the lithium brine from in Chile has environmental issues. So the supply chain risk, it's not about saying whether it's right or wrong. It's more about what is the risk to this future world that we're building. If we're serious about electric vehicles, what is the risk to that being a sustainable industry? And people just assume that electric vehicles are a sustainable industry. They're not. They're vulnerable. And we can also see that in China. China is trying to currently flood Europe with electric vehicles to try and dominate that market, which has caused the European Union to slap on tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. There's a lot. Nothing is really black and white. It's very complex. And one of the things that's also emerging, which I've seen, is that there has been a shift away from thinking about decarbonization and more towards how do we actually provide enough energy to keep the world running. And that's both in the US and China. So if you look at China, yes, it is launching huge infrastructure projects for green energy, but it's not necessarily doing that because it's trying to make China more environmentally friendly. It's doing it because it needs more energy sources. It's using renewables as a diversifier to increase the amount of resources, energy sources that it gets. Um, Likewise in the US needs more energy. So yeah, I mean, we could see, and this is what I'm seeing in the data, we most definitely will see a huge rise in green energy investment, but we probably will also see a huge rise in shale and oil investment. So it's, the problem that we face right now is that a lot of energy companies, it's not that they don't care about the environment, but what they care about is providing a sustainable energy source that will allow the economy to continue to function. And a huge drain on that is the emergence of AI. AI consumes a lot of energy. The biggest constraints that we have economically is basically access to energy. And so, and again, a, a simple story. It's a complicated story. And it's a story where we're trying to balance how can we reduce carbon emissions, but at the same time, how can we maintain the progress that was made economically up until now? And I think one of the things that I've learned through data visualization. So I mean, coming from the background that I'm in, I think about risk all the time. So it's not about being frightened or afraid of risk. It's about understanding and appreciating how risk can potentially affect my life and the decisions I make. And that is one of the reasons why I gravitated to data visualization. I mentioned earlier that I'm worried about the amount of data pollution there is in this world and how that is creating a lack of clarity. And this, I believe, can lead to to increasing prevalence of misinformation, and it can also increase geopolitical risk. It can increase bad decision making because we forget basically how our world functions. The more complicated the world is, the more dangerous it can potentially become because we forget how the world actually functions. And data visualization for me is a beacon. It's a tool to help us fight potential ignorance, to keep us more informed in a very human and personal way about the risks that we face as a society.
Yes, and again, thank you so much for being the leader in combining data visualization with your insights that you've developed from a diverse set of industry background as well, from banking to batteries. So moving on to banking, which at the moment isn't really in the forefront of conversation in the media, and as you and I both know, conversation flits about all the time. You have written about some concerns in the data that you're seeing in the banking system before, not recently, but you have before. And I'm wondering if there's anything you're looking at in that sector now, or that you have recently that you might want to point out from a risk perspective or an opportunity perspective to Prinsights viewers and to anyone else who is watching this video.
I think the biggest risk in the US right now is the amount of debt that it's kind of racking up, and the US is in a unique position where it has the largest, most liquid bond market on the planet, the US Treasury market, and subsequently, its greatest export isn't cars, it isn't oil, it's actually the US dollar. The United States, its most innovative and greatest export is the US dollar. Everybody wants the US dollar. And that has allowed it to borrow huge amounts of money, which has also allowed it to supplement and almost replace that kind of decline in productivity that the US has experienced over time. Subsequently, by borrowing, it's allowed the country to continue to expand economically and to experience growth. But what you're seeing right now is that for every dollar borrowed by the US government, it's getting less GDP growth. So there's a kind of declining, diminishing return on those dollars borrowed. And that's worrying. That places the US in a risky situation. The US for decades had been importing deflation into the United States by buying cheap goods from China, and it allowed the US to experience a fantastic quality of life, and really expand as an economy. If the US reindustrializes, it changes the system, and this is not about whether it's right or wrong, and that's more about politics. But from a data perspective, the United States will need to change its model, and the problem is that if it's got a lot of debt, and it no longer needs that debt, and no, and those countries that were exporting to the US are no longer buying that debt, then it needs to somehow service that debt or reduce it. And so there needs to be some sort of transition for the US. If the US really does go down the route of reindustrializing and shifting production home, it will also need to find a way to boost productivity, to keep economic growth going, and also somehow reduce its debt bill, or the amount of interest it's paying on its debt. So that's one of the things that I see. I don't know what the answer is. I'm certainly not as knowledgeable as a lot of macroeconomics economics people out there, but that's one of the things that I think about, that concerns me.
And so it's interesting because yes, debt is astronomical in the United States. The debt to GDP ratio, as you point out, is basically at historic highs if you really isolate the manufacturing projection going on in the States versus other countries. But also other countries are supplanting some of their growth with debt. You wrote a recent piece or set a bunch of data visualization graphics to points about whether China is entering a period of Japanification, if I am saying that.
Yes.
Along those lines a little bit, could you kind of delve into that?
I mean, it's very complicated because Japan is not the US. Sorry, China is not the same economic system as the US. So there's a lot less transparency up there. So we don't know 100% what's going on, or whether or not we don't know for certain if China will be able to muddle through and deal with the structural issues that it currently faces, which is a very inflated real estate market, and also rising debt, that threatens to bring almost like a kind of Japan-style deflationary spiral on the country. We don't know how that will pan out because it's a very different economic system. It's a command-style economy, and so the Chinese government, the way economics works in China is just so different from a free market like the US, where we have our own economic theories, we have our own kind of fiscal and monetary tools to maintain economic stability, which we have done so for hundreds of years. In China, I have no idea what's going to happen. And from an investor's perspective, my first kind of my gut feeling is I'm not going to expose myself to that because I don't understand China. And I think a lot of investors feel that way. That's the reason why there's been a huge decline in investment in China, because investors just don't trust, or they fear what might happen, and they don't. There's just no transparency. Where is this country going to head? It may do really well, but who are the real winners? We don't know. So it's really hard to understand the Chinese economy, and honestly, right now I'm avoiding it. It's not somewhere where I'm allocating to.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Just in closing, I had two questions for you. And again, I'm just such a fan of all of your work, all of your analysis and your data visualization, charts, graphics, the whole nine yards. Where do you see opportunity for the investor? We talked a lot about risk. We've talked a lot about evolving trends, and we've talked about things that are less transparent in the mix, like the Chinese economy. Where do you see value if I'm an investor and you're looking at the data? What do you see sort of perking up?
I guess I don't really think in that way, to be honest with you. For me, it's about, like, my philosophy is only ever expose yourself to risks that will offer a reward. That's a very kind of broad philosophy that I have. So avoid the risks that don't reward and only expose yourself to the risks that do. Think from a risk basis onwards. Like that's for me the number one. That's what that motivates me. That's how I think philosophically about investing. So I don't necessarily look for opportunities in the future. What I think about is what could derail my portfolio or cause me to lose money. I'm not really hunting for the next big thing. I'm trying to ask the questions that are not being asked or look for the risks that are not being considered. And generally speaking, that is how I look at the world. And right now, I think that we as a society are at a pivotal moment where if we don't understand or comprehend or see through the cloud of data that is growing and growing every day, we risk making bad decisions. And I believe that humanity is at risk. They talk about global warming as being a danger to or a risk to causing a mass extinction event. But we never talk about the risk that ever increasing amounts of data face to the human race. We could become extinct because we have too much data. No one talks about that. And for me, this is how I look at the world. So it's not, yes, I do look at the world. I think there are opportunities, but I believe that the I believe that the biggest risk that we face is not understanding the world that we're in. If we lose everything we have now, like everything, like our whole economy disappears, the whole US economy disappears, and we have to be hunter-gatherers. How many of us would actually be able to go out there and survive? I wouldn't. I don't know how to make a fire. I don't know how to live. I don't know how to survive like the way that I evolved for hundreds of thousands of years. And that is basically the subject of a book I've written that will be going out in July. It's due for release. You can pre-order on Amazon, and it's basically on how data visualization could potentially save humanity, which is
What's the
something that
title?
it is from chaos to clarity.
Nice.
So like right now we're living in a world of chaos, and things are fantastic. Like things have really improved over the centuries. Like we are living, and we have a fantastic quality of life right now. Like human beings are really excelling globally. Like extreme poverty around the world has declined dramatically. We are living like kings right now. But all of that can be lost very quickly. And we need to be aware of that. We need to be aware that human progress isn't always going to improve. It can very rapidly disappear, just like the stock market can suddenly decline, just like Nvidia's stock price can suddenly plummet overnight. So we have to be aware of those risks. And I believe that data visualization can help us see those risks.
Well, you are the master. I so appreciate the work you and your team do on data visualization and on just finding these risks and keeping us all informed. It's great that you have the book coming out around the corner. I will absolutely pre-order it. I encourage everyone else to pre-order it and also to sign up and consider being a paid subscriber for James's Substack because it really has phenomenal information and I do like the fact that you focus on risk and helping people to visualize how the world is, where the risks are, because knowing that does make people better investors and also safer by knowing what's out there. And you are serving the broader world by doing what you do. So, James, thank you so much for your time today. Everyone else here, thanks for tuning in to Prinsights.
Thank you very much.